and were connecting these bodies of water. But this expedition had a really big impact because of the way that it was communicated. So this is a trajectory that they took over a 4-year period. But they had an artist on board for all 4 years. And the primary artist was named John James Wild. And he was on board this expedition. He was illustrating and painting and photographing some early photography. But it wasn't just him that was communicating this expedition. They had an entire team of artists back home as well, back in Europe, who were receiving the specimens throughout the expedition and were conveying that and communicating that to the public. And there was a team of writers. It was an entire community that was contributing to the success of this expedition. And because of the way that the expedition was communicated, it had a long-lasting impact. And that data wasn't just data on sheets of paper. It was now something that was being brought to the community abroad. So I felt really honored to be walking in these big footsteps on an expedition whose namesake had such groundbreaking results. So what I had produced was this calendar that showcased the beauty of the Antarctic, and it was being sold post-expedition to fundraise for programs for youth and marine science. And then we produced this illustrated expedition log, and it told the story of the expedition in a way that people could read and engage with and see what it's like to be on a field expedition in the Antarctic. So now to bring it back to the role that all of this plays. Science, when you boil it down, is the art of observation. It's our way of exploring and understanding, explaining the natural world around us through observation and continuous observation. But the purpose of science is to drive progress by providing solutions to community needs, societal challenges. But that science doesn't operate in a bubble, it operates within communities. And communities have always relied on the arts and storytelling to communicate information. This is not something new. It wasn't something that just happened during the Challenger expedition 150 years prior. It's something that's been happening in communities since the beginning of time. And that storytelling has taken so many different forms, from early cave drawings that can be seen in preserved caves to dancing rituals that convey values and stories through song and dance, to the long-standing history of oral storytelling in so many different cultures where values and morals were conveyed through these stories that are passed on through generations, to written text and textbooks and learnings that are passed on from one generation to the next. Storytelling has been at the core of passing on knowledge in our cultures and our communities all around the world. And that's because communities are linked through values, and these values shape our community policies, our interactions, and even our individual actions. And stories contain more than just information. They're able to link those values and to bring that to the forefront of the communication. And they've become this pathway to reach values and to tap into core emotions. So there's been a lot of studies that have shown that you can't reach people through facts alone. You have to be able to tie in the emotions, because emotions are very closely tied to our values, and values is what inspires us and what drives us to take action. But it's really, really important in all of our communication strategy that we remember that it's really the balance of the two, because stories without facts are opinions and they become untrue. But facts of those stories lack relevance and they lack context. And that's why sometimes with science, when it's not rooted in stories, it's not rooted in community, it can be really hard to be applied effectively. And in studies that have looked into what emotions have been the most effective in terms of driving action, sometimes we forget that it can be the positive emotions that actually drive action the most effectively. So gratitude, compassion, and pride drive action far more effectively than fear and guilt. And it's not to say that fear can't be used effectively in storytelling. It just means that it needs to be used mindfully and sparingly. You can't necessarily rely solely on fear, and just those kind of stories can actually drive people to inaction rather than action. So if you can tap into gratitude, compassion, and pride, you'll actually have a much more effective result in terms of driving engagement and change of behavior in people. And this is something, so I'm in Canada, so my context right now is Canada, but we've seen this in the last couple of weeks with some of the challenges that we've been facing politically. People have been rallying around this Canadian pride. They feel driven to change their actions to buy Canadian products because they feel rallied around this pride for their country. So it's been interesting to see how quickly people tapped into that when they felt connected to a movement. And boiling it down to the science again, character-driven stories actually release oxytocin. So it's not just about stories, people need a character to relate to. And that character doesn't need to be human, it doesn't necessarily need to be an animal, but it needs to be something that we can rally our context around. So character-driven stories are much more effective at releasing oxytocin. And when you're able to release oxytocin, it makes people more trustworthy, generous, charitable, and compassionate. And these are values that drive community and action. So it's really interesting to look at it from the study's perspective and what they've been able to determine from these studies. And character-driven stories also result in better retention. So people will remember the facts better and they'll remember them within a context because they're relating it to that story, that character. So continuous change and action relies on memory as well. People need to be able to recall what the moment was in order to change their behavior or to integrate their learnings into their daily lives. So if you're able to contribute to better retention from a memory perspective, then our form of communicating is going to have a much more effective result. There was actually a study that they did, and a lot of people, for those of you who spent time in academia studying, I know that I did this in my study groups where we would create stories sometimes, especially with cell biology and things like that, where there's so much to memorize. We would start to create stories to try and remember the cell dynamics or and they conducted a study. There was a study that was conducted where they had a control group of people and then a study group. And so the control group was given 10 words and asked to memorize them in any order that they wanted to. And then they were given a certain amount of time to memorize those words, a couple of minutes, and then to try and recall those words. And then the study group was asked to recall the words by linking them through together in a story. And the ones that linked the words in a story were able to recall 7 to 10 times more words than the ones that didn't and just memorized them at random. So it's really interesting to look at it from that perspective too. So I'm going to dive into a couple of stories, and I'm referring to the arts in all of this as storytelling because I find that it's a much more inclusive term to refer to the arts, and it connects the arts to community by referring to it as storytelling. So storytelling to me really that's visual arts, it's music, that's dance, that's all our methods of communication are encapsulated in storytelling in the way that we link them to our culture and our community. So the examples that I'm going to share will be examples of many different methods of both visual and auditory storytelling. So this is one that I think all of us are familiar with because it was such a major campaign and it took off so quickly. And it was the Last Straw campaign, and it took off so quickly because if you think back on it, there was a character at the center of the story, and it was a character that people felt a lot of compassion towards, a sea turtle with a straw stuck in its nose. And this simple story and these simple visuals just went like wildfire across the world. And two nations actually completely banned plastic straws, and many municipalities banned plastic straws. Many businesses, Starbucks changed their entire drink lid to ban plastic straws, and we watched this movement go across the world. So it's really interesting to see how, because this was a character-based story, how it had such an effect. Another example is this Wash the Shore project. And so this is an initiative, it's a foundation that they run shoreline beach cleanups, and then from the trash that's collected, they build these plastic sculptures of marine animals. So they're they're working with a trifecta because they're cleaning up beaches, they're creating a work of art that is engaging the community and conveys a message, and they're also collecting data on plastic pollution when they're picking up the plastics. So their project is directly linked to community action in the area where it operates, and is linked to science and data collection, but also in terms of conveying, communicating a message, and resolving an issue of removing plastic from nearby shores. This is another project called, this was a several film initiative. So the Shark Water films are in 3 parts, and they had a massive impact. They were one of the first films to bring the issue of shark finning to global attention, and resulted in shark fins being banned in multiple countries, created hundreds of shark conservation groups and an entire movement around banning shark finning. So it had a massive impact through this film. Another initiative around visual arts is seawalls, and this is where I think that they have ocean murals in 18 different countries around the world right now, and more than 500 ocean murals. And a lot of the ocean murals have specific messaging associated with them, like this one, for example, around fishing line. And some of them are more just around representing ocean visuals, but they've conducted studies in the municipalities where the seawalls are, and determined that it increases people's awareness of the marine ecosystem to have these seawalls nearby. This is a story that I really love. So it's called A Homeland Story, and it occurred in Vietnam. And it was a location where they were trying to drive change around the way that farmers were cultivating crops, because there was heavy use of pesticides and they wanted to curb the use of pesticides. But at this point, farmers had become very accustomed to utilizing pesticides. So they had all these information campaigns where they were trying to inform the farmers about the challenges of pesticides, and it wasn't having a lot of effect. So what they wound up doing was they created a soap opera with farming characters that the farmers could relate to, and it was a multi-part series. And over a series of a couple of months, the soap opera was airing, and it showcased the farming family and farming community, and touched on topics around pesticide use and the impacts, and over time conveyed that information through a story that was very relevant to the community that they were trying to reach. And at the end of the day, they conducted a study and determined that farmers who would watch the soap opera were 30% more likely to reduce their fertilizer and pesticide use on their crops, and that it was having a much greater impact than their previous information campaign. So I have a couple of other visuals up here of some other ocean art projects, one around coral bleaching. This fish is one, I don't remember where it started, but they now have this metal fish in many different beaches and different countries around the world, where it encourages people to remember to bring their trash off the beach and to put it in this big fish. And because it's big and it's charismatic, and it's been quite effective at reminding people to not leave trash on the beach. And then you have the underwater statue gardens that Jason DeCaires Taylor works on globally. So this one in particular is an image from the Underwater Museum in Cyprus. And his artificial reefs both help stimulate coral growth in those areas, but also draw divers away from more vulnerable local reefs and to instead dive on these sites. But I wanted to give a moment to also allow, so we can go back to the Mentimeter with this QR code. And I would love to hear some of the STEAM projects that you all have seen or have come across before we dive into the next section. So I'm just going to exit this window and go here, back to the presentation, and give a couple of minutes to this. So some examples of STEAM projects that you've seen in the work that you do or come across along the way. I hope I gave enough time to the QR code. Oh, you can also use this number code as well at the top of the screen if you didn't catch the QR. Yeah. Recycled art projects, poems on the ocean, design a whale as part of a workshop about whale evolution, UN Ocean Decade art exhibition. Yeah, they've been integrating a lot more arts into the conference spaces. So when you showed using ocean plastics to create art, yes. Marine photography portfolios, bottle caps from beach cleans made into mosaic art pieces. I'll just give it a couple more minutes, but also the person who wrote Design a Whale as part of a workshop about whale evolution. Would you have a moment to elaborate? I'm really curious about that one. Was it multiple whales? Did you showcase the evolution along the way, or it's also okay. You don't have to come on and speak if you don't want to. Life-size white shark made of trash collected from local Cape Cod beaches. Some pavilion of the Venice. Fauna. I'm not familiar with that one. Immersive installation using video and audio from shipwrecks. This is at a museum, yeah. Okay, I'll give it 30 more seconds. Plankton are in Paris. Plankton? Is it plankton? Okay. Thank you for sharing all of those. It's really interesting to see the projects that people have come across and the impact that they have. One of the other really interesting things in terms of storytelling is from an educational perspective too. We're often learning about auditory, kinesthetic, and visual learners and how to apply different forms of teaching in order to reach the different styles of learning. But with storytelling, you can actually reach all three in one. With kinesthetic, it's not always necessary to actually go through and do it by hand, for example, if you're learning something. With piano players, for example, or guitar players, they've conducted studies to determine whether or not like running through the riffs or running through the keys mentally in their head can be as effective as playing them physically on the keyboard. And it can be a pretty effective secondary tool in terms of like running through something mentally. So when you tell a story, if it's engaging enough, when it's being done in an engaging way, you can actually activate for the kinesthetic learners. And the stories can be told in a way that activates for auditory learners, as well as a visual learning style. Even if it's an auditory story, if it's very descriptive, you can manage to target visual learning styles, or you can integrate visuals as well into the storytelling through film and alternative medias. So storytelling applies to all approaches of learning when effectively applied. Um, so this Princeton study on the brain and how the brain receives communication determined that when a story is being told, activity activates for both the speaker and the listener, and it aligns in terms of which areas of the brain are activating for the speaker and the listener. So on these fMRI scans, you can see the same reactors light up in both as the story progresses. So it's really interesting because you can share ideas, feelings, and experiences in the minds of learners. And this image as referring to the network of mycelium that trees use to communicate with one another. So the same electrical impulse is a very similar, um, it's a very similar methodology in terms of the way that trees communicate and the way that we communicate through stories. So it's all electrical impulses that are being passed along and repeated and replicated through that. I should probably dive in a little bit more for those who are not familiar. So trees have this symbiotic relationship with fungi and this fungal network in their root systems. And they're able to use the fungal root system and network and root system to communicate with one another and to even communicate to pass on nutrients. And a lot of this is done through electrical impulses along the hyphae. And so similarly, our electrical impulses along our synapses that are activated through stories communicates in a very similar manner. So it's so interesting to see how nature communicates and how we communicate. When you boil it down, it's the same. So I wanted to chat about how to apply the arts and sciences. And I love the slogan about full steam ahead. And we're not the only ones who are moving full steam ahead. This is being integrated in university settings across the US and some of the most prestigious universities in the US. So MIT, Princeton, Harvard, University of California, Berkeley, New York University, they all have STEAM programs that they've integrated into their academic institutions to drive much more engaging communications in the science realm. So it's something that's being not only applied in community settings, but it's now being recognized in academic settings, which is so exciting because the arts are often overlooked in terms of their importance and their ability to get engaged. So to see it recognized in these institutions that are looked up to around the world is very exciting because it wasn't always like that. So it's a big step ahead. So in terms of communicating, some of the most effective steps that you can apply is to have a global but local focus. So to be able to see the big picture and what you're trying to communicate, but to be able to apply it to a local setting, your audience, to be able to narrow down that story to your target audience. Local doesn't necessarily mean local to your direct community. It also just means that you have a target audience that you're applying your story to or your artistry to. And then to have it rooted in values, to have a foundation of values ensures that you're communicating in a way that people can receive. And that you're applying the tools that you have available for storytelling. So that can look so different for different projects. So it can be visual arts, it can be dance, it can be film, it can be sculptures, it can be really engaging infographics with visuals that people can read and engage with. It can be a children's show, whatever the form is and the tool that you want to use to apply to your storytelling. It can look very different from project to project. And then you have to consider what is your skill set as a scientist and how can you apply it? So that's your own personal call to action. What is your call to action to yourself in this communication? So if you're a microbiologist, what skill set are you bringing? What is the knowledge that you're applying to this project? And then it's important to have a clear call to action for your audience. This is really important because when we tap into people's emotions without having a place to direct it towards, and that happens too often, then people start to feel despair. They feel like, oh, there's all this happening around me that I don't know how to contribute to or what I can do to support. And then eventually people get emotionally tired and they don't engage with things as much. So it's important that when we apply storytelling, that we also give people somewhere to direct their learnings towards. And this can go from simple to complex, depending on what it is that we're trying to convey, the information that we're trying to convey. It can be simple if you're asking people to be more mindful of their electricity use at home and to turn off their lights. It can be much more complex. We're trying to engage people in a movement or trying to engage them in advocacy for something and directing them to ways that they can be part of that. But those are the 6 steps that we're going to focus on in this workshop. And again, go to Mentimeter. So we'll break it down one step at a time. And I'll give a couple of minutes to each step. And then we can share some of the projects that we've thought up afterwards. And And I'm sorry, this is the first time that I'm doing this sort of workshop online, and I know that it's not as engaging as it may be in person to be able to work in small groups. Um, but I'm going to do my very best to ensure that we have a discussion component at the end, and that we can really chat about some of the ideas that are here in this group and some of the expertise that we have in this group. But we'll start with the step by step. So I'm just going to pop out of this presentation and go back to the Mentimeter, and we can start with the topic that you wish to communicate. So think of something, here's the code. Sorry, I didn't have the QR scan on that last slide, but if you want to pop back into the Menti, that's the code at the top. But in terms of your area of expertise, just narrow it down to a topic that you would love to communicate and would love to have as part of a project where you're integrating the arts into your communication strategy. And then we can start with that and move through with that topic on the next 5. Coral bleaching. The importance of seagrass. That's fantastic. Native species conservation, plastic pollution, changing shark social networks, behavior potentially triggered by climate change and other environmental factors, ship strike to large whales, vessel strike and accidental entanglement of large whales, changing ocean currents with climate change. That's a really big one. Underwater acoustics for monitoring, underwater sound pollution. Yeah, I've seen a lot of really interesting projects around the underwater sound pollution, because where I live in the Pacific Northwest, we have a lot of shipping traffic here. And we also have many different whale species. We have a lot of humpback whales year round, actually. We have orcas, and the humpback whales are the most frequently involved in ship strikes here. But orcas are also heavily affected because they echolocate to find their food. So there have been some scientists that have been working with tech and developing. They created a VR experience from the perspective of the orcas that integrated the sound pollution into the VR experience, and they took that to Parliament in Canada to advocate for reducing shipping noise and reducing shipping speeds here in these channels, to help improve the conditions for the whales. It was really interesting. I got to try it. Entanglements of sea turtles and dolphins and ghost nets, ocean acidification impact of endangered ocean on our inner life. Yeah, fishing pressure on elasmobranchs, shark feeding, invasive species on British coastlines and its impact on zonation. Yeah, seabird species, importance to marine ecosystems and their sensitivity to climate change. Yeah. Okay, I'll give it another 30 seconds and then I'll go to the next one. It's intrinsic value of animals. Ugly doesn't mean bad. Yes, this is so important. It's not just the cute and cuddly animals that need our protection. And yeah, that's fantastic. It was really interesting to see the anglerfish video that was circulating from that anglerfish that came up to the surface, and people have been making all kinds of stories and cartoons, and it's like prompted storybooks and all kinds of interest around anglerfish, and it's so neat because they normally don't get any attention at all, and many people don't know about them. And they're yeah, they're being portrayed in such an endearing way. I've gotten sucked into that watching it online. Okay, so the next slide is write out your global but local focus. So if you can do that in a two-part, what would be your local audience, and then what's your global applications of the story as well? So for example, around vessel noise, it could be reducing vessel noise in local waterways to improve conditions for whales, but then with a global focus of shifting policy and shipping standards on a global scale through a success story that I've seen locally. Yeah, that's a good one. The local streams and rivers clean so the pollution doesn't reach the ocean. Introduce local go slow zones for ships to reduce risk of whale ship strike. Raising awareness of native species and highlighting their importance in ecosystems and human impacts, like no bees means no honey, and also impacts plants. Yeah. Create awareness so policies can shift in the local tourism industry. Yeah, this is important. Global increase awareness of seagrass habitats and the benefits they provide. Local aid in seagrass restoration projects like replanting, fragment collecting, seed planting. Yeah, that's a really good delineation of the two. How climate change's effects on the Gulf Stream will affect coastal communities in the US. Yeah. Yeah, reduce use of single-use plastics locally so they don't end up in the ocean. How climate change affects cetaceans and how that can affect us. The ocean starts in our houses. Yeah, all water leads to the ocean. So we have to think about our very own effects on our own houses. I'll give it 2 more minutes because it is a bit of a longer one. So don't want to cut anyone off mid-thought. Interconnectedness of water. Inform why it is important to reduce the consumption of shark and raise meat and why it's important for the conservation of these animals. Yeah. And there's been a lot of different strategies and the other thing too is you need different communication strategies for different audiences. So for some people, the conservation information will drive behavior change if that touches on their values, and for others, it's the health implications that'll cause a behavior change to be able to convince them through the health impacts of eating higher up in the food chain and how it can actually be quite dangerous to your own health. So sometimes it takes multiple tactics to be able to reach a broad audience for broad scale behavior change. Mangrove ecosystem services highlighting often misunderstood species or uglier ones and their relative roles in their ecosystem. Yeah, it's great. Okay. So if I missed anyone, I'm going to go to the next slide. So now write out the values you wish to convey in your project. So this would be boiled down to the value specific. So you want people to tap into their pride and local conservation, or you want them to tap into the community values and strengthening the community. So for example, or with coral bleaching, for example, if there's a big fishing community and you want to tap into their desire to feed and provide for their families. So it's important for us to steward the ecosystem that we rely on in order to do that. So whatever the values are that you wish to convey in your project, we can boil it down to that. Often in storytelling, we can find ourselves polarized when we're being too focused on differences. And they're in Florida, they have the Florida Wildlife Corridor. And there were a lot of initiatives to further protect this wildlife corridor. And it can be quite challenging to enact policy to protect an entire corridor because you're going through so many different jurisdictions. You need many communities to agree to its protection. You need support from both local and state government. And so they shifted their communication strategy for that initiative because initially, a lot of times with film, we're speaking to the people who are already on board, and we'll speak in a way that speaks to conservationists and tying into their values, but realizing that if we're trying to shift perspectives, that sometimes we need to speak to other values or broader values. And so they looked into the Republican values because Florida is a primarily Republican state, and boiled it down to how can they speak to those values. Oh, about pride. They tapped into pride actually as an emotion, like that pride and the ruggedness of Florida, and that desire to have an ecosystem that their children will benefit from, and these creatures that Floridians have grown to love, and the importance of protecting those ecosystems, and to be able to go out fishing and I forget what they call those, like shallow boats that go in the Everglades. But the ability to continue to do that and to do that with their kids, and they start to speak more to those values in a way that it would relate to the community that they needed to jump on board. Because if they continued to speak in a way that only spoke to the conservationists who are already on board with the project, and they were going to miss that opportunity to get much broader engagement and broader support for the initiative. And they had great success. They were able to protect the Florida Wildlife Corridor, which was a big success there. So here, I'm going to read these. Personal investment, the awe that ocean animals provide. Yeah. Health of the environment leads to the health of the animals, which leads to humans. Yes. So lower pollution, stewardship of the ocean. Everyone can get involved, whether big or small. There are ways to help the ocean, and everyone can and should be playing their part. Not human supremacy, intergenerational justice, environmental justice, trans feminine, indigenous people are competent. Yeah. Economic investment, ship strike damages ships, reputational damage, environmental damage. Protect whales, protect and promote brand. The desire of people to be involved in the community and care for their environment. Appreciation of our coastal ecosystems, economic importance of healthy oceans to fisheries communities, overall health of humans and coastal communities, tied to ocean health. Yeah, these are good. I'll give it another minute or so just to see if there's any other ones. But yeah, this is important too with the economic investment. Sometimes with businesses, you have to speak to them from an economic standpoint and say, oh, well, it's actually beneficial for you to adapt to this policy or to integrate these changes because it can actually be more beneficial to them, or if there's any kind of legal implications around striking whales, like the reputational damage, that it's in everyone's best interest. Okay, 30 seconds. Okay. And then describe your tools for storytelling. What would you be using? What would be the medium? Is it going to be plastic sculptures made from beach plastics that were collected from the beach? Is it going to be infographics? Will it be a performative dance? Is it film? What would be the tools that you'd be utilizing for this storytelling? Would it be a children's book, a show, a soap opera like they did in Vietnam? So I'll give this one a couple of minutes for brainstorming. Children's books, yeah. Film utilizing infographics and cartoon sequences. Yeah, these can be great, even integrating those into documentary. I've seen some beautiful examples of that. Photography and filmmaking, visual arts can be so powerful. Yeah. I mean, for me, someone who grew up far away from the ocean, that was my initial way of connecting to the ocean, was through film, stories, books, painting, photography collections, a short skit at the theater. Yes, love theater. Photography and film series, interactive educational site, photojournalism, infographics, educational initiatives, yeah, paintings, photography. The interactive educational site, Tuvalu, the lowest lying island nation, they've had to do a lot of cultural adaptation, knowing full well that their islands are going to be underwater in the near future. So they've been preserving, filming their cultural landscape and creating like a 3D mosaic of it that can be explored online by future generations to maintain that cultural connection to the land after it's underwater. And that can have huge cultural implications to still feel connected to space that you may have never seen for future generations, but to still have that ability to explore it. Photography, food. Yeah, honestly, food is a big one. Food is so core to community life. And there's so much artistry around food preparation and collecting food, nonfiction picture books and comics, yeah, handmade infographics with real life objects and arts, short informative films. Yeah, I have a friend who's doing a dinner series to help engage restaurant owners and those in the restaurant industry with sustainable fisheries. So that's a creative way to target that community because you're going to get them from a food standpoint, and restaurants want to have the highest quality. So if you can showcase to them how sustainable fisheries can be the highest quality and um, and the most economically relevant for them as well, then that can be a really great community to tap into. So there's just endless opportunities in terms of applying creative storytelling to different fields. I'll give it another minute to see if there's any other ideas that pop in there. Okay, I'll go to the next one. Oh, installations. Nature walks for native species. Yeah, I've seen these in my community and they can be hugely engaging for people. But some people don't know where to start. So if you can give them an opportunity, a place to learn, and then that gives the spark for continued engagement. Art events for kids and families, yes. All right, I'll go to the next slide. Okay, now this is the one to reflect on your skill set and how you can apply it to your personal call to action. So this doesn't necessarily have to be an artistic skill set. Maybe you're going to collaborate with an artist. So it doesn't have to be an artistic skill set. It can be your personal skill set, your science background, or any other expertise that you bring to the space. So this is your own personal call to action of what you're going to bring to the story and what you can offer. Yeah, Canva queen. We love a Canva queen. I wouldn't call myself a Canva queen. I would call myself a Canva peasant. I'm still learning and trying to trying to learn all the ins and outs of Canva and how I can use it to create more engaging content. But yeah, running informative walks, rock pool sessions, seagrass walks, using my own knowledge to educate others. Yeah, this is a massive gift to the community. Film and voice actor, that's amazing. Plus own knowledge, yeah. Early career scientist, but my background is in filmmaking and photography, always looking for new ways to combine my two passions. Yeah, it really helps to have filmmakers and photographers with a science background to be able to bridge the two. So there's a lot of opportunities in that field. Underwater photography skills and developing skills in ocean science. So I'm an undergrad, so I want to combine my love for photography with my new passion for research. Yeah, when I started out doing underwater photography, I went and worked for, I took a semester off of my undergrad and I went and worked for a production studio in the Philippines where they trained me. And I came back and I had bought my first camera rig and I was still doing primarily field science, but I would often bring my camera out with me. And I wasn't the photographer necessarily. I wasn't doing a photography gig. I was working as a scientist, but I would snap pictures and we would always use those photos for communications, for journals, for articles, and to be able to communicate the work that we were doing. And then eventually it started growing more into me moving much more into communication. So there's always a bridge, some place to start. Deep carbon cycle knowledge, ocean books collector, participation to a lot of artistic exhibitions. Yeah, this is amazing. Writing for children and telling stories about animal encounters. Yeah. Painting sessions along with informative talks. Musician, writing and performing pieces that evoke emotions. Yeah. Music has such an impact and an influence on culture. I'll just give it a 1 more minute and see if anything else rolls in, and then I'll go to the next slide. But I'm loving all of these. Okay, go to the next slide. So the last one is, what is your call to action for your audience? So depending on the project that you have, that you're using as your example for this exercise, this could be a small call to action or it could be quite a broad one, but it's just important to have it defined. Um, yeah, so for example, if it's, again, going with the shipping example, if you're targeting reducing shipping noise in shipping channels, then the one audience is going to be the ships themselves. So targeting them, and the intention is for them to reduce their ship noise and to reduce their speed in the channels. So we have a voluntary speed reduction here off of the BC coast, and the majority of ships comply to it. And it's made a huge difference, and they've been able to collect data on the amount of decibels that it reduces noise in the area, and it's quite significant. Um, but yeah, so the target audience would be the ship captains, the shipping companies, but it could also be the public, to put public pressure, for example, to sign a petition or to use your voices. Um, so it depends. It depends on who your audience is and who you're trying to target, and what you want that specific call to action to be for them. Shipping company training for crew regarding whales, volunteering speed reduction, collecting data on whales, including near misses. Yeah, this is great. Photography contests to highlight biodiversity and create connections to all animals. Think Nat Geo, but for the average person. Yeah, and this could be. I saw in some of the previous slides the advocating for the so-called uglier animals. So you can even integrate that into the competition, for example, in a fun way, like who can find the weirdest looking animal or something. Um, and so then you can create more awareness and advocacy for the lesser known or lesser really paid attention to species. I realize I keep looking here on my screen because this is where I see all of your faces. My camera's over here, so I'm like, I look like I'm talking to the wall, but that's where all the faces are on the screen. Um, reducing SEP, reduce SEP as in stand-up paddleboard, or I'm so sorry, I may not be familiar with this acronym. Recycle plastics and write legislators. Um, if the person who wrote that wants to pop in and correct me on the acronym, I'm not familiar with that one. Locally, be mindful of your trash. It could harm. Oh, single-use plastics. That makes lots of sense. Thank you for popping that in there. Reducing single-use plastics, recycle plastics, and write legislators. Yeah, thank you. Locally, be mindful of your trash. It could harm fishermen. Yes. Dispose of your nets properly. This is a big one. And ghost nets are a huge issue in terms of affecting marine life as well. So that's an important one to target the fishing community. And there's some really interesting, on the east coast of Canada, they're using ROVs to scope out discarded ghost nets. So then they're able to scope them prior. And that's a use of film technology with the ROVs. And then they can scope it out ahead of time so that they are very strategic where the divers go in and how much time that they need to go and recover and remove the net. Calling for collaboration, open communication, exchange of ideas between local scientists and commercial fishermen. Yeah, this is really important. And the fishing community holds a huge amount of knowledge on fisheries and stocks, and it's really important to engage them in conservation strategy. Engage the public in community science projects. Yes, creating bridges for the community to engage. Community centers and nonprofits can be great spaces for this, as well as schools. Yeah, often schools and educators are really keen to be involved, and they can be an amazing bridge for these kind of initiatives. Public, which touristic activities cause harm, damage to species and environment. Yeah, this can create a lot of change and advocacy to be able to target the public and inform them more. For example, in the Maldives, they've been having a lot of challenges around speedboats around the whale sharks and causing ship strikes. So they've been really targeting the public to engage them in this discourse and to lean on their support in terms of advocacy to put pressure on the way that these tourism operators are driving around the whale sharks. My audience are middle school students, and I'd like to engage them as ocean communicators for younger students, as if they are connectors between scientists and younger students. Yeah, this is awesome. I'll give it a couple more minutes on this slide. Okay, we'll wrap that one up. Okay. And back to here. Okay, so I wanted to open the floor to other voices other than mine as well, and to hear some of the reflections, thoughts, and questions from the group. And to also, if there are any stories that any of you have had the opportunity to share with an audience, or any kind of art and science collaborations that you've had success with that you'd like to share with the group, it'll be really great to hear some of your thoughts. I know it's hard in an online setting for to just open up the floor, but I would love to hear some other voices as well. So I think I'll just stop presenting, and that way you can see people's faces a little bit more. I know that there's a lot of people on here, so we won't get everyone on one screen. But yeah.
Hello. What is a project that you've got coming up that you are really excited about?
So I have a few that I have coming up. I'm going back to the Arctic with the same program that I went to the Antarctic with, to do more illustration for them, and to also turn it into much more public-facing project at the end. So to have it be illustrated into an illustrated expedition log that's more directed towards the public to learn about what expeditionary science looks like. And then in the springtime, I am going to be doing a couple of art tourism projects. So this was an initiative that I launched last summer as a trial, where I did daily paintings every day for 2 weeks and dropped these paintings off in public locations or with local businesses. And I posted them online, and every day at the same time, a painting would be posted online for the public to go and find. So the first person to find the painting would get to keep an original piece. And so it was promoting local tourism. It was educating about local parks and species, and engaging the public in this citywide sort of scavenger hunt around finding these art pieces. So now I'm going to be doing it on a larger scale with the local tourism board in 2 different municipalities near me throughout the spring. So we're going to engage additional artists and do more public paintings as well. So we'll do it just on a larger scale. So there will be more daily art drops, and we'll do some daily arts as well, public pieces that the public can come and like engage with and participate in. So one of them will be community art that they can add and contribute to. So I'm pretty excited about that one because it was lots of fun to see the project grow and to see how it can really promote ocean education and also be beneficial to local tourism and the businesses that are here, because there are a lot of really great businesses near me. Yeah.
Nice. I guess I did have a question in regards to that, I guess your Arctic expedition. And I guess it just comes from a lack of knowledge of like, how did you find this opportunity? Like, are these like formal art residencies that people are like posting on LinkedIn and like job sites, or was it kind of like you knew the PI, or like how you, I guess, discovered that?
Yeah, so this one in particular, I had the opportunity to work with the founder of Blue Green on a previous project, and I had painted on the expedition that I was on just for fun, because I traveled my paints all over the place. And as a thank you, after I had sent her a couple of the prints that I had done, and she reached out to me afterwards and she went, "Hey, we've been thinking about this and we would love to have you as a resident artist on board. I loved the paintings, was so thrilled by them. Would you like to come and join on this expedition as an artist?" So that one kind of came through the network, but there are expedition artist residencies. So for example, for the US, there's Schmidt's, and they do, I'm not sure how often they do it, but they do have artists on several of their expeditions. So, and you can sign up on their newsletter, for example. So when an opportunity pops up, you'll get an email in your inbox. In Canada, with Adventure Canada, they have an opportunity for an artist. It's not necessarily an artist residency, but it's a collaboration. So you can pitch an art project for it. So it's either an early career scientist or communicator. It's a little bit more open. But there are some other artist residencies with national parks and things like that. So there are a bunch of opportunities, and then sometimes you have to create them. So I'll go to events and network and kind of pay attention to who who the people are on site and maybe where their gaps are in communication. Because right now I do a lot of communication strategy, so I'll pitch ideas as well. So I find if I'm able to go to them with an idea that they haven't thought of before, you never know who's going to bite and be interested. And there could be some false starts, but then you can also open doors that you never knew were available. Yeah.
Nice, thank you.
Yeah, Angelique is also an amazing science communicator. Is currently working on a children's book with watercolor art illustrations. So feel free to shamelessly plug that and put it in the chat because it's a really amazing project. Yeah.
I have a question for you as well, Rosie, but it's a bit less about like, you know, projects and things like that. But I was wondering if you have any tips as well, because I'm thinking maybe some people are a little bit like me who are not very artistic, which I know a lot of people here are. But like, if you want to have a project where you're maybe, you know, you have a science background, like I do myself, and you want to work with an artist, like, do you have any tips on how you would engage or try and find an artist that could work with you to do this as like a joint project, for example? Um, any like, you know, what would you recommend?
So it depends. It depends where you are. Sometimes it helps to go to a lot of municipalities have like a local art community. So for example, in the municipality where I live in Saanich Peninsula, there's actually a fairly big local artist community here. There's about 150 members. So you could always go to them. But they don't necessarily always have experience in science communication. So if you're willing to kind of co-create this project and work with them as you grow in it, but then in terms of if you're looking for someone who has a lot more experience with science communication, then there are also networks that are broader. So a friend of mine that I've worked with, she started this online network called ECOS, and it's all about creatives in ocean science. So when a project comes to her, then she puts it out to the community and she says, hey, does anyone have this skill set and would be interested in engaging on this project? So it could be animations, it could be like a public art display activation, it could be film and storytelling, or maybe creative writing. And then when the projects come through, then she puts them out to the community, and then the community can jump on board and pitch. So if there's an animator, they can say, hey, yeah, I'm interested in that project. But right now, as far as I know, there aren't a ton of communities like that. That's the only one that I've come across so far, but I'm sure that there are others. So it really depends. But there was a study, I can pop it into the chat, where it was essentially that it was actually a study in Nature, and it's so much fun to see these art and science studies because scientists love data. So then being able to see a study in Nature that is promoting the impact of here, let me see if I can get this in this chat. So I'm using a new setup for the first time, and it's definitely it's definitely challenging me a little bit. So they did a poll for 340 different scientists who had collaborated with artists, and polled them and asked if they would do it again. And essentially all of them said yes. And they said that it was most effective when it was a collaborative process, when both parties had agency in the way that it was communicated. Because you need the scientists, you need their input so that it's fact-based, but you also need the creative outlook of the artist or the the artist and the communicator, because they're going to know how most effectively to engage the public. And the way that I see it is it's similar to how when you try and work with pure gold, it's too soft, it's too malleable, it's very difficult to work with. But when you're able to mix it with steel, then you make it this strong proponent. So when the arts and the sciences are able to work together, then we have this really amazing metal. In terms of, yeah, an example. Then you have this amazing, strong material to work with that's benefiting from both the creative applications of the arts and the fact-based applications of science that goes through this robust process to determine the best course of action. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna try and get this copied and pasted into the chat. Maybe I'll put it in after. I'm just having a little fight with my screen here.
Don't stress. We actually have one question in the chat as well from Dunia Z, who asked, Rosie, what's your favorite example of using art to explain science?
My favorite example. Oh, I think it's really hard to boil it down to just one. I don't have a favorite one, but I'll share one that we did recently. So in the springtime, I was one of the resident artists for Ocean Week Canada, and I was part of the Toronto hub, and I grew up in Ontario inland, and then I left 10 years ago and have been living in coastal ocean communities ever since then. So going back to the place where, oddly enough, my love for the oceans initially started, even though it was so far away, and trying to bring the arts to that space in a way that it would engage the public was a fun challenge, because I went, wow, this is a place that I fell in love with the oceans, and despite the fact that it was nowhere near, so how can I do that? How can I offer that same opportunity to other people? So I was collaborating with Ripley's Aquarium, and we set up this big community mural in the outdoor space, because we wanted the public to be able to engage whether they were going to the aquarium or not. And we painted this big map of Canada, and I got there early in the morning, painted out the whole map, and once the map was ready, then we had these fish stencils for the public to come and add a fish on the map where they felt connected to water in Canada. So it was both a datascape where people, at the end, this map was filled with fish, but the fish were placed in places where people felt most connected to water. So we got to look at the map at the end of the day and you go, oh, wow, this is where people from this area feel connected to water in Canada. And we did the stencils because I had really thought about it. I didn't want to just give them a paintbrush and they feel overwhelmed, because a lot of people go, oh, I don't know how to paint, or no, I'm okay, I don't want to do the paintbrush. But if you gave them a stencil, and I saw it happen so many times, so I went up and I was like, hey, would you like to add a fish on the map? And they're like, oh, that's okay, but no, I don't paint. And I said, but it's a stencil. And then they went, oh, okay, yeah. And they came up and they did their little stencil. So removing that barrier really helps, and it got people to engage. And if someone wanted to paint something on their own, they were more than welcome to. So some people painted jellyfish on the sides of the map and added their own proponents, but at least the stencil removed that barrier to entry. And I was kind of playing with, okay, how do we create a public art piece that's also informative? So creating this little datascape with a school of fish, and everyone gets to add their stencil. And it was a really great experiment. And then we also had local nonprofits come and set up booths on the side, so then people could move from the public engagement to go and learn something about the local waterways and what stewardship in their backyards look like. So I really loved that, because we were able to engage both the arts and the sciences by having the nonprofits, and some of them had water test kits that people could trial and play with. So that was a really nice example for me, seeing it in action and seeing the impact that it had and the joy that it brought people, and what removing barriers can look like. Yeah.
I love that. I love that example. And I think the removing the barriers part is like such a good, I wouldn't even thought about that. But if it was me there, I probably would have also said the same thing. So
Yeah.
Super great.
Because I think that's one of the things in our creative endeavors is you want to think about how to make it inclusive, because that's part of the purpose with integrating the arts into science, is to reach a broader audience and to make it more inclusive. So then thinking about how, okay, when I'm engaging the public, how do I ensure that I either engage my target audience, or if I don't have a specific target audience, then how do I engage a broad audience and make it something that people can relate to? Yeah, sorry, I wasn't watching the chat, so I don't know if
There is one more question in the chat. The question is, where could we find the most effective data visualization about ocean, especially for teaching?
I think it depends on what you're looking for, because there are a lot of different visualizations. So for example, there's MPA Atlas, which is a website where you can go and you can see all the marine protected areas. So if you wanted to chat with your students about marine protected areas around the world and the different management strategies for them, because not all marine protected areas are created the same. You have reserves, you have multi-use, you have some marine protected areas where drilling is allowed, and some where absolutely nothing. Can't fish, can't even go in the water in them. So it could be, for example, a fun educational tool to showcase to students, especially for teaching. Yeah. But I think it depends because there's so many different tools. So it really depends on what you want to teach and what you want to show. So, and the age groups as well. So for the young ones, something like a children's book that shows inclusive science, similar to what Angelique is working on right now, that can be an amazing tool, because it's a story and it's very engaging, and it brings them into this underwater world in a way that they get to follow along a storyline and explore different ways that science contributes to conservation and the different wildlife. Or if it's an older group, then you want to challenge them a little bit more. But I can maybe look up a few resources. But if there's anything specific in terms of data visualization that you guys want to hear about, let me know, because there are a lot of tools and resources and geared towards different age groups. I see there's an art sciences workshop in there. That's amazing. Yeah, also, if anyone else has any plugs or projects that they're working on, please pop those into the chat. I would love to check them out, and I'm sure others would as well. Oh yeah, I see a residency program for the Arctic Circle. There's a call for artist residencies right now for Kluane National Park in Yukon Territory in Canada. Um, I believe it's a 2-week residency up in the Arctic. Are there any other questions or maybe projects that people are working on as well? I would love to hear any projects that others have done.
Another question came through, Rosie. Do you have any suggestions of resources for people who are trying to build their artistic science communication skills? I'm currently dipping my toe into the waters of art science communication as a science background person and don't have a lot of art skills currently, but I'm interested in building them.
Is that specifically for visual arts or photography? So for visual arts, I think for example, where I am in Victoria, if you're enrolled in a master's in fine arts at Victoria, there's an opportunity to apply for an artist residency with Ocean Networks Canada. And so they pay a stipend every month, and then the artist gets to collaborate with Ocean Networks Canada. And you don't have to be at any specific stage in terms of art. But I would say if there isn't a program like that near you, then I would seek out a local nonprofit or organization that you like and that you align with their values and see if you can collaborate on a project. And it could be a bit of a trial of both ways, because if you haven't necessarily developed a skill set to the level that you feel 100% confident, and to be honest, like none of us feel 100% confident ever. Like I feel like I'm learning all the time when I'm working on these projects, but it can be really encouraging to work towards a goal with an organization that you admire, and then to work on a communications project with them and grow alongside them. And then it helps with the whole trial and error. So for example, if you're trying to do illustrations, then you can work on a project. Or if you're trying to do animation, you can collaborate on a project with them that is benefiting their communication strategy, and it's also helping you build the skill set. But otherwise, if there's looking into any local opportunities that there are, I would suggest taking like a class or two in the visual art that you want to pursue, because it can help a lot. And often there's also funding. Like we have, sorry, I hope I'm giving. It's just hard without the context. But if you want to hop on and let me know a little bit more specifically the region that you're in or the specific art, so I can give more direct information about it. But there are a lot of places have funding for continuing education or something like that if you want to take like one course. So for example, for me, in my community with the Spanish Peninsula, they have this grant program. It's called Artsy, which is amazing. It's spelled Art and C. And they have these grants. So if you wanted to take a course or like continuing education, and I didn't know about this community until I did a deep dive. And I went to my local art gallery and they went, oh, wow, you're an artist, there's this community, you should tap into it. There's these grants and all of this. So kind of plugging myself into the community and going to the resource hubs near me helped me find a lot of information. And now I know that there's these grants, and the grants are actually helping to fund the project that I'm doing with art tourism. So I would definitely suggest like go to your local gallery, pick their brain, chat with a local nonprofit that you can collaborate with, look into any kind of like grants or opportunities for continuing education. Or if there's any like art mentor near you who doesn't mind to take you under their wing. So near me, they have like painting drop-ins and things like that, where you can go and do to a live studio and do like a painting drop-in. Yeah, so there's a lot of directions that you can go with it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm down in Florida, so I did appreciate the Florida Wildlife Corridor example because that's very close to home. But that actually does help a lot. I currently work in training and engagement, and I'm similar to what you said, like a Canva cousin, where I'm starting to get into digital media and just trying to build my skills there because I'm starting to become that person for my workplace.
Yeah. And it helps a lot. So if you're doing it for your workplace and then building on that skill set, or you want to do it for some local nonprofits, and it's tough when you're pouring a lot of time into it, but sometimes taking on a volunteer gig or two and then they start to recommend you to other people or direct people towards you, it can pay out in the long term. Or you can go from the get-go and just say like, hey, this is what I can offer, this is what I'm worth, and create a project with them. And then the more you practice, the more you build on it. And yeah, it's just really exciting. Florida does have some opportunities actually. If you pop your email in the chat, then the Dive community, there is the Dive Newswire that's based out of Florida, and they're doing some local projects with artists and galleries. I just have to look a little bit more in depth into that specific opportunity, but I can forward that to you. Repeat the campaign in Florida that used pride as a value. So this was the Florida Wildlife Corridor. And it's an example that Nat Geo uses often with their filmmakers about how to reach your target audience. But you can look up, there are a lot of different initiatives for advocating for the Florida Wildlife Corridor. But Path of the Panther was an interesting film that made a big, here, let me put that in there. The Panther. Path of the Panther. Yeah, Florida Wildlife Corridor. I don't know the specific name of the campaign. I was actually trying to find it earlier this morning. But that was the project. Yeah, great film. Yeah. Campaigns, pride as a value. Were there any questions that I missed? Trinidad and Tobago, hello. Early reader chapter book for amazing for ages 5 to 8. That's amazing. Okay, yeah. Are there any other questions or stories that people want to share? Yeah, we have a hand up, Marjorie.
There, now can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I just wanted to say I hopped onto this call late, but I'm so excited by the conversation. I love it. And I had a question, which is, what do you think makes an ideal scientist in an art science collaboration?
Oh, I think honestly, open-mindedness helps a lot because you're co-creating with your artist collaborators. So it's important to be able to hear the perspectives on both sides. But it really helps to have a clear scope and a vision. Because in terms of co-creating, if you're trying to go too broad or unsure of what it is that you want to communicate, but that, as you discuss, then you help to narrow that vision. But it does help to have a clear scope in that collaboration. So if you're wanting to focus on coral bleaching specifically in an area, then defining your scope goes a long way, because then you can really figure out your target audience and kind of going through that step by step. What are the values that you want to tap into? Who's the audience that you want to target? What's the change that you want to make? And sometimes it helps to start from the end. To start from the end goal and go, okay, well, this is our goal, and then you can work your way backwards. But yeah, I think that open-mindedness goes a long way, because your artist collaborators kind of bring a different perspective and a different approach. So it's really nice to be able to bounce that off of each other. And similarly, the artist also has to be open-minded and ensure that they're they're communicating in a way that accurately reflects the information. um,
Thank you. That's super helpful and wise advice. I'm collaborating with a colleague who's in the environmental arts. I'm a marine biologist.
yeah.
To develop a summer workshop at the Art Science Interface, and it's just been so delightful, but also sometimes really surprising to discover how we look at the world similarly, but also quite differently.
Yeah.
It's
And
really
who's your workshop targeting?
It's targeting basically either active artists of sort of any age and stage, well, adults on up, and then scientists, same. In terms of education, we would encourage advanced undergrad or undergrad equivalent people to apply, and otherwise it would be sort of grad level or active arts practitioner level on up.
Okay. Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah. I've been working similarly here to both target the artist community and the academic community. So,
Right.
yeah, because often artists aren't sure how to engage either, and they want to be a support, but they're not sure how to tap in. They're not sure where to engage. So, showing them step by step, okay, this is how you can collaborate with the science community or nonprofits, and this is the support that they are in need of. And then similarly, academics don't always know where to start either. Yeah, so sometimes just giving them that toolbox can go a long way.
Right, giving the outline for them to paint in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I loved your example of that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Do you recommend any online course or any materials for scientific illustration but focus on watercolor? In terms of watercolor, I just did a lot of trial and error personally. But there were some artists that I followed online whose style I really loved. And I found for me, repetition helped. So sometimes painting the same thing a couple of times over to watch my progress helped a lot, because with any skill set, you have to hone it. But one thing that also helped me to explore more around like color theory in a more forgiving way was I recently tried Procreate for the first time, which is a tool that you can download on an iPad. And there are similar tools that you can use online on your computer if you don't have an iPad or don't have access to one. But it allowed me to be more forgiving, because you can play with layers and you can erase them and move them. Because sometimes when I was using my watercolor materials, I'd be so scared to make a mistake. I'm like, I don't want to waste the paper. I don't want to like waste any of the materials that I have. And so I put too much pressure on myself and not just explore. So a couple of things that I do is I try and create opportunities for myself to just learn and remove that pressure. So I have a sketchbook that's just solely for messy things. It's for layering colors, trying things. And then it was really nice to explore on the iPad, and I could take it out with me and just like on the bus, for example, just playing with the iPad on a plane. I was like drawing a bunch on the plane when I was traveling, which is hard to do, to like pull out watercolors and do that. But any online course or focus on watercolor, I personally don't know of any, but I know that there are ones, and YouTube also helps a lot. Yeah, I'm so sorry. I've got more helpful there. Jess has her hand up.
Kind of piggybacking off of Marjorie's question a little bit. How do you, I guess, encourage scientists maybe to be a little more open-minded when it comes to art? Sometimes some challenges that we have, or that I've been facing with my work, is that it's daunting for them to go into too much to the art side. So do you have any recommendations of like how to smooth that over?
For scientists, I say speak their language. find find some data and statistics on it. Share with them the Nature article, which I'm going to figure out how to pop in the chat. For me, like I look at my audience and I'm like, how can I speak their language? How can, if it's data that convinces them, or if they need to see an example and being able to showcase examples to bring it to them. For example, you can say, hey, I've really wanted to integrate the arts more into the work that we're doing, and here's some examples of similar projects to ours where they've been able to integrate the arts and it's worked, and look at the results. Because scientists can be very like results driven, very data driven. So I would bring that to their attention and start planting the seeds, and then give an example of a project that could work, that would be relevant to the work that you're doing. But yeah, I think with like any audience that you're trying to target, it's really about figuring out how to present it in a way that it'll be received, and that they'll hear it, and that they'll see what benefit it can have, what are the applications directly to the work that they're doing. So I actually had like a list of a couple of resources. So there was Hakai had this article. Oh, let's see. Hakai had this list of articles, and I had the Nature PubMed link. See. Okay. There we go. Okay. Yeah, so that's the Homeland story, which is the story of the Vietnamese farmers. And then the PubMed link to the Nature article, and then this article that Hakai had put out where they had 5 different examples of science communication through the arts on different projects. And they have a bunch of different mediums represented, and they're all very interesting. Some of it is painting, some of it is installations, and there's a variation of the ways that data and information is integrated into the communication strategies. So that could be interesting, maybe. Any other questions?
If there's no more questions, then just as I said that, something comes through. That's always the way it goes. Let's see. Okay. Just a nice
Great.
message.
Yeah. It's really neat to see how many different places are represented here.
Yeah, it's super nice. It's been such an engaging call. So thanks everyone who's been on the call. Everyone's been super engaged, and yeah, it's really makes it that much better. But if there's no more last minute questions, then maybe it's time we can wrap it up and say goodbye for now. And thanks so much, Rosie, for your time and for the presentation today. It was super amazing. And hopefully, if all went well technically on my side, I will put up the recording of this session in the member section, but never say never, because sometimes things don't go to plan, but we'll see. And one last thing from our side, Women Ocean Science, is shamelessly plug from our side, is that we now announced on February 11th that we have a collaboration with ICB Journal Integrative Comparative Biology Journal with 10 places available to publish your own work. It could be a review, it could be your own research, it could be kind of a more opinion piece. So if you're interested and you have something you want to share from your research side, if that's something that you do, then please go to our website into the member section, which is free to sign up, and where you can also access the recording, and please apply if you're interested. But that's it from me. And Rosie, please, do you have anything last things you want to say? Take it away.
Yeah, I just popped my contact in the chat if anyone wanted to reach out. But this was such a joy. Thank you both for facilitating this. And we're so grateful for the women in science community for creating these opportunities and bringing us all together. It's such a joy to be part of this community, and I'm really grateful to see all of you here and from so many different places in the world. Yeah, I think I saw Angelique's hand up, or yeah, no.
No, I just don't know where the heart. I couldn't find where the heart was. No.
That's all good. Yeah.